Rain fell like it had no intention of stopping. It drummed against the windows of the Glass Harbor, a restaurant made of steel, and light its walls trembling under the gray Seattle sky. Outside, Lila Morgan stood at the curb, holding what was left of an umbrella that had lost its will to live. The fabric flapped helplessly, ribs twisted like broken wings. She laughed softly to herself, the kind of tired laugh that came from a long day teaching art to kids who drew monsters and galaxies with equal passion. She was soaked from the knees down, her hair clinging to her face, and she wondered again how she had let Sophie talk her into this. Sophie had said it would be quick, harmless, maybe even fun. Go meet him, have dinner, tell me how it went. The last thing Lila wanted was another awkward date, but Sophie had pleaded. It was supposed to be Sophie's setup, but her friend had double booked herself. So here Lila was 29, single, wearing her least wrinkled dress, and pretending she wasn't dreading the night ahead. She shook her umbrella one last time, gave up, and stepped through the glass doors. The warmth hit her instantly. Candles glowed in gold holders, jazz hummed softly, and waiters moved like dancers. It smelled like cedar and wine. A hostess glanced up with a polished smile. Reservation name. Lila blinked, trying to remember the details Sophie had mumbled between phone calls. Ryan, I think. Table for two? The hostess nodded and led her through the maze of tables. Lila followed, heart pounding faster than she expected. Each table seemed filled with perfect people, laughing in soft tones, and she tugged at her damp sleeve, hoping no one noticed the raindrops sliding down her arm. The hostess gestured toward a corner table by the window. "Mr. Hayes," she said. The man looked up. He wasn't smiling, not at first. He had that look of someone used to waiting alone. Sharp jawline, navy suit, no tie, eyes gray as the weather. Lila caught her breath. He seemed far too composed to be a blind date, but she was already there, and running away would be worse. So she did what she always did. When nervous, she smiled too much. "Ryan," she said, voice a little too high. He hesitated only a second. Then something flickered behind his eyes, a decision perhaps. "Yes," he said finally. "You must be Sophie's friend." "Lila," she offered quickly, sitting before she could change her mind. "Sorry I'm late." The rain decided who was in charge tonight. His lips curved into something like a real smile. "I can tell. Your umbrella didn't make it. It put up a good fight." For a moment, silence stretched between them. He looked at her as if trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. Lila reached for the menu, though she couldn't read a word. "So Ryan," she started. "What do you do consulting?" he said smoothly. "Mostly tech." "Oh, that sounds complicated. Mostly it's people who make things complicated." She laughed softly. He liked the sound of it, though he couldn't have said why. For months, Adrian Hayes had eaten dinners like this one, with clients, investors, people who smiled because they wanted something. Tonight had been another such meeting, until this drenched woman walked in and called him Ryan. Something in her unguarded sincerity had caught him off guard, and before he knew it, he'd said yes to a mistake. "Do you like what you do?" she asked. The question was simple but disarming. "Some days," he said. "Other days, I wish I were making something you could actually touch." "Like art," she teased. He tilted his head. "You sound like you know what that feels like." "I teach art at Roosevelt Elementary. I spend my days convincing 7-year-olds that clouds can be purple if they want them to be." He smiled again, this time warmer. "Sounds like you win a lot of arguments." "Not really. They usually convince me." Their food arrived, her pasta, his salmon, and for a while, conversation came easy. They talked about colors that shouldn't go together, but somehow did, about old teachers who changed everything about the smell of pencils and rain. He told her about growing up near the water, about his mother who used to paint until life got in the way. She told him about her students, one of whom drew suns with faces, because the sky should look friendly. When she spoke, her hands moved like they were still painting the air. When he listened, it felt like time slowed. Outside rain softened to mist. Inside the world shrank to their table and the soft rhythm of breathing between words. It wasn't supposed to matter. She was here for someone else. He was supposed to be someone else. But something in that mistake felt right. When the check came, Lila reached for her purse out of habit. "Let me," he said. "No, please, I insist. I'm not that kind of date." "Neither am I." Their fingers brushed briefly, and both looked away. She folded her napkin, hesitated, then took it back, tearing off a small square. With quick, careful motions, she folded it into a tiny paper bird. "Art isn't about money," she said, setting it between them. "It's about seeing what's real." He looked at the fragile bird, then at her. "And what do you see right now?" She met his eyes, uncertain but sincere. Someone who doesn't want to be where he is. For the first time that night, Adrian forgot the name Ryan. The rain outside stopped, as if giving them permission to breathe. When Lila left the restaurant, the city had turned to a shimmer of wet reflections. She walked toward the parking lot, holding her shoes in one hand, laughing quietly at the absurdity of it all. The date had been strangely easy, almost too easy. The man Ryan, or whatever his name truly was, had listened in a way few people did. He hadn't interrupted, hadn't looked at his phone, hadn't pretended to understand art, but still asked questions that made her heart hum. In a world where everything felt rushed, the evening had felt still. She drove home humming to herself, thinking that maybe Sophie was right, maybe surprises weren't always bad. Inside the glass harbor, Adrian sat alone for a moment, longer staring at the little paper bird. It sat on the white tablecloth like a confession. He hadn't told her his real name. He hadn't told her about the empire built on algorithms, or the investors waiting for him upstairs, or the security team who would soon realize he'd skipped an entire meeting to share dinner with a stranger. For the first time in years, he had felt like himself. No boardrooms, no masks, no expectations, just a man in a rainstorm sitting across from someone who didn't want anything from him. He tucked the paper bird carefully into his wallet, paid the bill, and walked out into the mist. The next morning, Lila told Sophie everything. They sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by half-finished canvases, coffee mugs, and chaos. He was different, Lila admitted, still unsure what word fit best. He listened. He asked about my kids, and when he smiled, it felt like he meant it. Sophie raised an eyebrow. And I may have left him with a paper bird. A what long story? Sophie laughed, shaking her head. Lila, you just described the perfect man, and you think he's a tech consultant named Ryan. That's what he said. Girl, you've just walked into a Netflix script. Lila rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. Somewhere in the city, Adrian was sitting in his office, overlooking the water. The skyline was sharp against the morning fog. His assistant entered with a folder listing schedules, calls, and meetings. He nodded automatically, not hearing a word. His mind kept replaying her voice, the way she'd said real like it was something sacred. He opened his phone, searched Roosevelt Elementary Art Program Seattle, and scrolled until he found a photo of her class. A woman with paint on her cheek, surrounded by laughing children. Something in that image disarmed him completely. For years he had been measured by numbers, growth charts, profit margins, acquisition deals. Yet one dinner with a stranger had made those numbers blur. Later that afternoon, his business partner Grant stormed in. "You missed the investor dinner last night." "Where were you?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Personal reasons." "Personal," Grant scoffed. "Since when do you do personal?" Adrian said nothing. The paper bird in his wallet pressed lightly against his chest, like a heartbeat he hadn't noticed in years. That evening, while the city lights bled into the water, he found himself driving past Roosevelt Elementary. The school was closed, the playground empty, swings swaying with the wind. He parked but didn't get out. He just sat there watching the building, wondering why something so small could make him feel this restless. Meanwhile, Lila spent the week pretending not to think about him. She told herself it had been one night, one mistake, and that she wasn't the kind of woman who built castles from coincidences. But when one of her students brought her a paper bird, folded from notebook paper, she smiled and thought of him again. On Friday, a small envelope arrived at her classroom. No name, just her initials written in delicate ink. Inside was a single note. "Thank you for reminding me what's real." No signature, no return address, just those words. She stood by the window, reading them again and again. Outside, rain began to fall steady and familiar. In another part of town, Adrian sat at his desk, staring at the same kind of rain. His phone buzzed messages, meetings, noise, but he ignored them all. He had built an empire teaching machines how to predict human behavior. Yet he couldn't predict why a woman he'd met once made the world feel suddenly, painfully alive. The next morning, fate decided to test them again. Lila stopped by a downtown cafe before heading to an art supply store. She ordered her usual, a black coffee and a muffin, and waited by the counter. When the barista called her name, someone else reached for the same cup. She looked up. It was him, not Ryan, the man from the glass harbor. His eyes widened in surprise. "You," she whispered. He blinked, almost sheepish. "You remember me? Hard to forget." The only man who didn't check his phone at dinner. He laughed quietly, guilty. She glanced at his suit, the expensive watch, so still consulting. He hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that. I see." There was a pause, long enough for the barista to notice the tension and look away. "I wanted to call," he said softly, "but you didn't have my number." "That's one way to explain it. You're right," he admitted. "You caught me. I didn't expect to meet someone like you that night." "I was waiting for someone else." "So was I," she said. "Guess we both sat at the wrong table." "Maybe the right one," he said quietly. She tried to hide her smile but failed. "You're impossible. And you're still folding paper birds, I hope." She laughed. "Maybe, if the world needs reminding." They stood there in the soft noise of the cafe, surrounded by strangers and the smell of rain on coats. He looked at her like someone memorizing a scene he didn't want to end. Then her phone buzzed a reminder for class prep, and she sighed. "I have to go," she said. "Of course." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the folded napkin bird still perfectly intact. "You left this behind." Her breath caught. "You kept it." "It's been a good reminder," he said, "that some mistakes are worth keeping." She didn't answer. Instead, she took the paper bird, unfolded it gently, then refolded it slower this time, hands trembling just a little. "Maybe it's time it flew somewhere new," she whispered. She placed it on his coffee lid, and walked out into the drizzle, leaving him standing there smiling to himself, feeling the rare ache of something real beginning. The drizzle had softened into a silver mist by the time Adrian found himself parked outside Roosevelt Elementary again. He wasn't sure why he drove there. Maybe because he couldn't stop replaying her laugh in his head, or maybe because the silence of his penthouse had become unbearable. From his car, he could see the faint glow from a classroom window on the second floor. Someone was still inside. He stepped out, the cold air stinging his face, and followed the sound of faint music through the open side gate. Inside the classroom, Lila was packing paintbrushes and rinsing jars. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, a streak of blue paint along her wrist like a careless signature. She looked up when the door creaked. "Mr. Consultant," she said, half smiling. "You're persistent." He lifted his hands. "I come in peace. I brought something." From behind his back, he revealed 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Peace offering." She tilted her head, amused. "Hot chocolate. You think that fixes lies. It's a start." She hesitated, then took the cup. "You're lucky I'm too tired to fight. Long day always. Paint kids' emotions. My job is basically controlled chaos." He smiled. "Sounds a lot like running a company." She raised an eyebrow. "A company?" He froze for half a second. "Consulting company," he corrected quickly. She laughed. "You almost sounded important for a second." "Far from it," he said, but the irony wasn't lost on him. They sat on opposite desks, sipping chocolate, while rain whispered against the window. The smell of acrylic and cinnamon filled the air. "You really kept that paper bird," she said after a while. Why, he stared at his cup. "Because it reminded me that not everything has to be perfect to matter." She studied him for a moment. "You talk like someone who's lived 1,000 days that all felt the same." "Maybe I have," he said softly. "And then one didn't." The room fell quiet. Outside, the mist thickened, turning the world into watercolor. She stood grabbing her coat. "I need to lock up." He followed her out, and they walked under the awning together. The streetlights reflected on the puddles, turning every step into a soft glow. "You know," she said, "I usually walk home from here. It's only 10 minutes. Then I'll walk with you. You don't even know where I live. Then I guess we'll find out together." She shook her head but smiled anyway. They walked side by side through the quiet streets of Capitol Hill, their breaths visible in the cold. Passing cafes closing for the night, neon signs flickering, people huddling under shared umbrellas. Seattle at night had a rhythm of its own, soft and melancholic, like a song without words. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said, suddenly. He hesitated, then looked at her. "I used to paint." "You, when I was younger. My mom was an artist. I loved the smell of turpentine, the way colors mixed and made something new. Then I grew up, got busy being logical." "What happened to your mom?" "She stopped painting when my dad left, said art didn't pay the bills. She sold her brushes one summer. I kept one. It's still in my desk." Lila nodded quietly. "That's sad. Maybe. But sometimes we need to lose something to see what it meant. And now you consult. Now I manage chaos disguised as progress." She chuckled. "We really are in the same business." "How about you?" he asked. "Tell me something no one knows." She thought for a moment. "I used to stutter when I was little. Teachers said I'd never speak clearly. So I started painting what I couldn't say." "Do you still stutter?" "Only when I'm scared," she admitted. He smiled. "Then I hope you never do around me." She looked away, hiding her blush. They reached the corner of her street. Old brick apartments, ivy crawling along. walls the smell of wet concrete. "This is me," she said. He looked up at the narrow staircase leading to her door. "You live here alone, me and my plants. They don't talk much, which is ideal. And you're not afraid walking home this late. Seattle's more lonely than dangerous. Besides, I carry a mean paintbrush." He laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." There was a pause, the kind that stretched between two people who didn't want to say goodbye yet. "Thank you," she said softly, "for walking me. Thank you for letting me." She looked at him, then the streetlight catching her face. Just right, gentle, tired, real. "Ryan," she said slowly, "whoever you really are." The night was nice. His breath caught. It was. She turned toward the stairs, then stopped. "You know what I tell my students? What that real art isn't about skill. It's about honesty. The second you fake it, the canvas knows. Does the same rule apply to people?" She glanced over her shoulder. "You tell me." He wanted to tell her everything, his real name, his world, the lie that had started their story. But the words stuck. Instead, he said, "Maybe honesty takes practice." She nodded. "Then start practicing." She went inside the door, closing softly behind her. Adrian stood there for a long moment, staring at the faint glow from her window. He felt like a boy, again, standing in front of something he didn't deserve but couldn't walk away from. He turned back toward his car, the street empty, except for the echo of her laughter. As he drove home, the city blurred into lights and raindrops. He rolled down the window, letting the cold air bite, needing to feel something raw and unfiltered. At a red light, he pulled out the paper bird. It sat in his palm like a promise. He whispered almost to himself, "You make it sound easy to be real." The light turned green, and he drove on the rain, washing away everything that wasn't true. Morning light spilled across the small apartment like a slow confession. Lila's alarm buzzed muffled under a pile of sketchbooks. She reached for her phone, still half asleep, and froze. A notification banner glowed across the screen. Tech billionaire Adrian Hayes, spotted dining with mystery woman. Her heart jolted. The thumbnail showed the exact corner of the glass harbor where she had sat 2 nights ago, laughing over pasta and hot chocolate. The man in the photo, her Ryan, was dressed the same, looking at her the same way. But now the caption screamed something else entirely. Adrian Hayes, founder of Hayes Tech, worth $3.8 billion, known for his aloofness and refusal to date publicly. Lila dropped the phone as if it burned. Her pulse raced. She replayed every word, every look, every moment. He had lied. No, she told herself, she had assumed. He had let her. The distinction didn't matter. The betrayal felt the same. She scrolled through article after article. Mystery teacher, one headline read. Another said the billionaire and the woman from the rain. Someone had even screenshotted her folding the napkin bird. There were hundreds of comments, some curious, some cruel. Gold digger, one read. He could do better, said another. She turned off the phone, suddenly aware of the silence in her apartment. The world had found her before she could even name what they were. Across town, Adrian's office was chaos. His PR team had been calling since dawn. His assistant looked terrified. "You were trending last night," she said. "We're trying to contain it, but the photo went viral." He stood by the window, jaw clenched. He hadn't realized someone had taken their picture. Do we know who leaked it? Probably someone from the restaurant staff. She hesitated. They've identified her. The press is asking for comment. Don't, he said sharply. No statements. Adrian, if you don't say anything, the story writes itself. Then let it, he muttered. but by noon he couldn't ignore it anymore. Reporters were waiting outside his building. Shareholders were emailing, asking if he'd lost focus. Every minute, his silence was being interpreted as guilt, pride, or indifference. Still, the only person he wanted to explain himself to was the one least likely to answer his call. At Roosevelt Elementary, the principal called Lila into his office. He spoke gently the way people do when they are choosing words that won't sound like judgment. "Lila, this has gotten big," he said. "Parents are concerned. We're going to ask you to take a short leave until things settle down." "Because I had dinner," she asked, her voice breaking. "Because the internet doesn't care about context." She nodded, numb. Her students would see the headlines. Their parents would whisper. Every effort she had made to build trust gone overnight. As she left the building, flashes erupted near the gate, photographers shouting her name. She kept her head down, tears mixing with the drizzle. That evening she returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. No name, just her address scrawled in ink. Inside was a note in handwriting she recognized. "I didn't mean to lie. I just wanted one night where I wasn't a billionaire." Her chest tightened. She read it again, the words trembling in her hands. Then she folded the note and set it beside the napkin bird she had made. They both looked small now, foolish almost. The phone rang again and again. Journalists, curious strangers, even Sophie. "Lila, this is crazy," Sophie said. "He's literally on CNBC, talking about innovation while the internet ships you to. It's not funny." "I didn't say it was. Are you okay?" Lila didn't know how to answer. "He lied to me," she whispered. "He sat there pretending to be someone else. And now I'm the one paying for it." The next day, Adrian showed up at her door. No cameras this time, no entourage. Just him in a gray hoodie, rain dripping from his hair. She opened the door, halfway startled. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I had to explain." "Explain what? That you live in a different world. That this was a game. It wasn't. You could have told me the truth. Would you have stayed if I had?" She stared at him, unable to speak. He looked tired, more human than she remembered. "I didn't plan any of it," he said softly. "You walked in and called me by the wrong name. For once, I didn't correct someone because I wanted to know what it felt like to be ordinary." "You're not ordinary," she said. "You never were, I know, but you made me wish I could be." For a moment, neither spoke. Rain hit the windows in steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Neither of them could ignore. "I can't do this," she said finally. "I can't be a headline." "You're not," he said. "You're the only part that was real. You should go." He nodded slowly, eyes dimming. "If you ever need me, I won't," she said, closing the door. He stood there for a long time before walking back into the rain. Inside, Lila sank to the floor, tears finally falling. Somewhere across the city, a billionaire sat alone in his office, staring at a paper bird and realizing that sometimes the cost of pretending is losing what was real. By the end of the week, Lila's world had turned into something she barely recognized. News vans lined the street, outside her building, lights flashing through her curtains at night. Microphones shoved in her face whenever she tried to leave. The internet had turned her name into a punchline. Memes of the billionaire's mystery art teacher spread faster than she could delete them. She stopped answering her phone, stopped opening the curtains, stopped painting. Sophie came over with groceries and tried to cheer her up, but even Sophie's optimism was starting to crack. "They'll move on," she said gently, setting a carton of milk in the fridge. "They always do." Not before they tear something apart, Lila murmured. Her eyes were red from crying. I didn't ask for any of this. I just went to dinner for you. Sophie's expression broke, and I'm sorry. If I had known who he was, you couldn't have. Lila slumped onto the couch. He could. Meanwhile, at Hayes Tech headquarters, Adrian's assistant was fielding non-stop calls. CNBC wants to know if you're confirming the relationship, she said. Your investors are asking for a statement. Adrian stood at the window again, Seattle gray reflected in the glass. He hadn't slept. His inbox was full of words like crisis management and shareholder trust. Draft something that says it's personal, he said finally. That's all. Grant stormed in before she could reply. Personal. You're a trending scandal, Adrian. You vanished during an investor dinner show-up with a school teacher, and now we're in damage control. The board is furious. Let them be, Adrian said. This isn't their story. It's becoming their problem. You need to make it go away. By what? Throwing her under the bus? By being smart. No, Adrian said coldly. I've been smart my whole life. I'm done being smart. He left the office before Grant could stop him. By evening, he was at Lila's apartment again. He didn't knock right away. Through the door, he could hear the faint sound of music, a child's voice from a recording, laughter, something pure. When she finally opened the door, her eyes widened. You shouldn't be here, she said again. Same words as before, only this time her voice cracked. They'll see you. Let them. You don't understand, she whispered. They're everywhere. They wait outside. My neighbors think I'm selling secrets. My school suspended me. I can't even walk to the store without someone filming. He stepped closer. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Then let me help. How with your lawyers? Your money. You think this is a project you can fix. I'm trying to protect you. Then stop. Her voice broke on the word. For a long second, they just stood there, rain pattering against the hallway window. Two people trapped between care and chaos. You lied to me, she said. And I let myself believe it was real. That's on me. It was real, he said. Every moment of it. Then why does it hurt like this? He couldn't answer, because the truth was that he didn't know how to love without trying to control the outcome. Because his entire life had been built on solving problems, not feeling them. Please, she whispered, just go. This time he did. Outside, reporters waited. Flashbulbs exploded as he stepped into the rain, but he didn't flinch. The next morning, headlines screamed again. Billionaire walks out of lover's apartment. Grant called before sunrise. You're making it worse, he snapped. The board is threatening to freeze funding. Then let them. You think this is a joke? No, Adrian said. I think this is the first thing that's ever mattered. Grant hung up on him. For the next few days, both of their lives unraveled in different ways. Lila spent hours reading articles she swore she'd ignore, watching her own face appear on talk shows where strangers debated her motives. Why would a woman like that attract a man like him? One commentator asked. Maybe it was a stunt, another suggested. Maybe she played him. Lila turned off the TV, her reflection trembling in the dark screen. It wasn't just the noise that hurt. It was the idea that the world had decided who she was without ever asking. The following Monday, she received an official notice from the district unpaid leave until further review. That night, she packed her paints into a box and sat on the floor staring at the walls. For the first time since childhood, she didn't feel like an artist. She felt like a story someone else had written. On the other side of the city, Adrian attended a shareholder meeting that felt more like a trial. The room was cold, sterile, lined with men in tailored suits. "We're not paying you to have a midlife crisis," one said. "Your personal life affects market trust," said another. Adrian listened detached and realized he didn't recognize the man. They were describing the polished CEO, the asset, the machine. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "trust isn't built on perfection. It's built on truth. And truth doesn't need your approval." He walked out before the vote. That evening, while Seattle sank under another storm, he found himself driving aimlessly through the city. At a red light, his eyes caught a mural on the side of an old bookstore. A painted flock of paper birds rising from an open hand. He parked and stood in the rain, staring at it. A child had painted something similar once, Lila had said, because the sky should look friendly. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just trying to protect her. He was trying to deserve her. Back at her apartment, Lila packed a small suitcase. She left a note for Sophie. "I need quiet. Don't worry." She turned off her phone, closed the blinds, and boarded a late bus heading south. As the city disappeared behind the glass, she whispered to herself, "Let them find someone else to talk about." The bus rumbled through the rain, streetlights fading to shadows. Somewhere far behind her, Adrian stood alone by the mural until dawn, his reflection drowned in the puddles. In the morning, he would wake to a world demanding more answers. But for now, all he could think about was a paper bird that once sat on a table and a woman who had seen through his armor as if it were glass. 2 weeks passed before the world decided it wasn't done with her. The noise had quieted just enough for Lila to breathe when the next storm hit. It started as a single tweet, a blurry photo taken outside Roosevelt Elementary. In it, she was kneeling beside one of her students, a little boy in a wheelchair, his face hidden by the angle. Her hand was cupping his cheek, comforting him after a fall. But the caption twisted it into something else entirely. "Teacher gets too close with student," it said, paired with the old headlines about her and Adrian. Within hours, it was everywhere. Screenshots spread like wildfire posts, recycled and edited the story, distorted beyond recognition. Someone even added false context, the same woman, linked to billionaire Adrian Hayes, seen in another scandal. Lila's phone exploded with messages, some cruel, some pitying, none helpful. Sophie came over immediately pale. "We have to call someone," she said. "This is libel." But Lila just sat on the couch, staring at the image. Her face frozen mid-expression, kindness turned into evidence. "No one will believe me," she whispered. "They already decided who I am." Across town, Adrian's office was chaos again. Grant slammed the door. "Do you see what's happening? Your girlfriend, if that's still what she is being painted as a predator. This will ruin her, and it's going to drag you down with her." Adrian shot him a look that could have shattered glass. "Don't ever call her that again." "Then do something," Grant snapped. "Make a statement. If I do it, makes the story real," Adrian said. "If I stay silent, it makes her the villain. Either way, she loses." He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling in. "There's got to be another way." "There isn't," Grant said. "This is PR. Either you protect the company or you protect her." "And what about the truth?" Adrian asked quietly. Grant didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. By evening, the story had hit every major outlet. Lila's school email crashed under the flood of hate messages. Parents called demanding her termination. The school board convened an emergency meeting. That night, Lila sat by the window of a cheap motel on the edge of the city, watching headlights smear across the wet glass. She had checked out of her apartment after reporters had found her address. The room smelled like bleach and rain. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. She turned it face down. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself, tired eyes, trembling hands. She thought of the little boy in the photo, how scared he must be seeing his face blurred in the news. She thought of her students, of the trust she might never get back. And she thought of Adrian, wondering if he'd seen the image, if he was fighting for her or hiding behind another conference call. He was sitting in a boardroom at that exact moment, every eye on him. A presentation flickered on the screen, graphs, numbers, projected losses. "We recommend distancing the brand," an advisor said. "Make a clear statement that you have no ongoing involvement with Miss Morgan." The words landed like a hammer. Adrian looked at the faces around the table, men and women he'd built an empire with, and realized he didn't respect a single one of them. "If you speak up, we lose investors," Grant warned. "If you stay silent, she loses everything." Adrian's pulse thundered in his ears. "Then we lose investors," he said finally. "But at least one of us keeps their soul." He stood and left before anyone could argue. It was raining again, hard and cold. He drove without knowing where he was going until he saw the glowing sign of the motel. Her name was still on the guest registry. He knocked gently. "Lila, it's me." Silence. "Please, I just want to talk." The door opened an inch. She looked smaller than he remembered. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't hard." "Then you haven't been online today." "I have," he said softly. "I saw everything. And I don't care what they say." She laughed bitterly. "That's easy for you. You'll wake up tomorrow, still rich, still powerful. I'll wake up unemployed, humiliated, and branded forever as your mistake." "You were never my mistake." "Then what am I?" "The only thing that ever made me question who I've become." He stepped closer, his voice low. "They'll move on. They always do." Maybe she said, tears in her voice, "But not before they destroy me." He reached for her hand. She let him for a second before pulling away. "Go home, Adrian. Protect your company. Save what you can. You are what I want to save." She shook her head. "You can't fix this. Not with press statements. Not with money." "Then how?" "By letting it burn. Maybe that's the only way it stops following me." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that love could fight through anything, but her eyes told him the truth. He was the reason her world had fallen apart. He left the motel without another word. Later that night, she packed what little she had and boarded a bus heading south. When the city lights faded behind her, she finally allowed herself to cry. Adrian drove home in silence. The apartment felt like a museum, expensive, cold, filled with things that didn't matter. On his desk sat the paper bird. He picked it up, tracing the creases with his thumb. "If you speak up, we lose investors. If you stay silent, she loses everything." The words echoed in his mind until they became unbearable. He opened his laptop and drafted a statement. It wasn't PR approved, it wasn't clever, it was real. He posted it under his name. "Lila Morgan is one of the kindest people I've met. The photograph circulating is false. The story is false. What isn't false is my silence, and for that I'm sorry." The post went viral within an hour. Support poured in from artists, teachers, parents, strangers who recognized the manipulation. But it was too late to reach her. She was already gone somewhere beyond the reach of noise, leaving behind the wreckage of two lives twisted by misunderstanding. In the morning, Adrian's phone buzzed with messages from Grant, from journalists, from everyone, demanding an explanation. He ignored them all. He stood by the window, watching the sunrise break through the clouds. For the first time in months, the sky over Seattle looked friendly. 6 months later, the rain in Portland carried a different sound. Softer, almost forgiving, Lila had found work at a small community center on the East Side teaching art therapy to children with disabilities. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't pay much, but it gave her peace. Every morning she walked past the mural of a paper bird on the brick wall outside, painted by her students in bright, uneven strokes. "We can still fly," one of them had written beneath it in crooked blue letters. She smiled every time she passed it. Inside the center, her classroom was a world of color and noise. The tables were messy with paint jars, glitter glue sticks, and laughter. The children adored her. To them, she wasn't a scandal or a headline. She was just Miss Lila the teacher who brought cookies and told them stories about skies that never ended. One of her students, Mia, a shy girl with a hearing aid and a fascination for origami, had started folding paper birds after class. Soon all the children joined her. Within weeks, the ceiling of the art room was filled with dozens of them, hanging from thin threads fluttering gently whenever the door opened. Lila would look up and feel her chest tighten, not from pain anymore, but from something close to hope. Life was quieter now. She rented a small apartment above a bakery. She biked to work. She read again. The noise of Seattle felt like a distant storm she had survived. But sometimes late at night, when the wind rattled the windows, she thought of him, of Adrian, the man she'd met by mistake, who had looked at her like the world finally made sense. She didn't check the news anymore. She didn't want to know what he was doing. She had promised herself that some stories didn't need sequels. One Friday afternoon, as she helped the kids clean up, Mia tugged her sleeve. "Miss Lila, do paper birds ever find home?" The question caught her off guard. She knelt beside the girl, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They do," she said softly, "if someone remembers where they took off." Mia smiled satisfied and went back to folding. When the children left the room, fell quiet except for the gentle flutter of paper wings. Lila sat alone at her desk, fingers tracing the edge of a drawing. Hers and Adrian's silhouettes, sketched in charcoal unfinished. She tore it into smaller pieces, dropped them into a jar, and poured blue paint over them until they disappeared. "Let the past be art," she whispered. Outside, the sky was turning orange over the Willamette River. The bakery downstairs sent up the smell of cinnamon and coffee. She stood by the window, watching people pass ordinary lives unbothered by noise. A knock startled her. When she opened the door, it was the mailman holding a small brown package. "From Seattle," he said, handing it to her. She frowned. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box and a note written in careful handwriting. "For the teacher who reminded us that art is honesty." She opened the box. Inside lay a delicate silver charm shaped like a paper bird. Her breath caught. No name, no signature. Just the charm and a faint scent of cedar. She held it for a long moment, unsure whether to smile or cry. Later that week, during class, she wore it around her neck. The children noticed immediately. "It's pretty," Mia said. "Is it magic?" maybe Lila said. "Maybe it helps paper birds find their way." After class, she took the kids to paint a new mural outside the center, one where the paper birds flew higher, reaching a sunrise instead of clouds. As she dipped her brush into yellow paint, She realized the ache in her chest was different now. It wasn't loss anymore. It was memory softened by time, reshaped into gratitude. She still didn't know if Adrian had sent the charm, but she liked to think he had. Maybe he had remembered where their story began. Maybe somewhere he was learning how to be real, just as she had learned how to let go. That evening, after the last child had left, Lila stayed behind to lock up. She looked up at the ceiling full of paper birds swaying gently under the fan. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to chase answers. She whispered to the empty room, "Fly home." The birds rustled softly as if they understood. Seattle had changed, or maybe it was Adrian who had. The skyline still glittered, the harbor still whispered under the wind, but the silence in his penthouse had grown louder with every passing day. 6 months had felt like years. The company he once ruled now ran without him. After his public statement defending Lila, the board had turned on him slowly but decisively. Contracts were lost, investors pulled out, and the empire he built began to fracture. At first, he tried to fight it. Then one morning he stopped. He sold most of his shares and walked out of the glass tower without looking back. The press called it a breakdown. He called it breathing. He moved into a smaller place by Lake Union, traded his suits for old shirts, his board meetings for quiet mornings by the water. Sometimes he would take his mother's old paintbrush, still stiff with dried color, and dip it into water just to remember what it felt like to create something useless but honest. On the desk near the window sat the same paper bird edges, soft from being handled too often. Every morning he'd unfold it, look at the faded creases, then fold it again, as if repetition could rewrite what had been lost. People had stopped calling after a while. Even Grant, he didn't miss the noise. He missed the sound of her laugh, the unguarded kind that came from truth, not performance. One rainy afternoon, he visited an old art gallery near Pike Place. The air smelled of oil paint and nostalgia. A small exhibit caught his eye: community art therapy for children. The brochure showed photos of smiling kids holding paintings, their eyes wide with color and wonder. At the bottom was a logo he didn't recognize, but the words stopped him. Cold Portland Community Center for Children with Disabilities. He traced the line with his thumb heart tightening. He hadn't searched her name in months, afraid of what he might find, but now he didn't have to. He could feel her presence in every brushstroke of those photos, in the small paper birds the kids held. That night, he sat by the water laptop open and began to write. Not a press release, not an apology, just a story. He titled it "The Girl with the Paper Bird." He didn't mention names or places. He wrote about a woman who taught children to paint skies friendly enough for broken hearts, about a man who mistook power for purpose, until he met her about silence and truth, and the art of becoming human again. He posted it anonymously on a writer's blog he had followed for years, then shut his laptop. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. Teachers, artists, and strangers commented, saying it reminded them that kindness was still real. A week later, a journalist traced the story back to him. When asked if it was true, Adrian simply said every word. The post reignited old headlines, but this time the tone was different. They didn't mock him. They didn't chase scandal. They wrote about change, about redemption, about the billionaire who gave it all up for art and meaning. Yet even as the world softened toward him, the ache didn't fade. Redemption meant nothing if she never knew. One evening, while clearing out old folders, he found a photo she had texted him long ago. The paper bird she had folded on their first night, sitting beside 2 cups of coffee. He stared at it for a long time before finally opening a new document. He began drafting a proposal for a non-profit art foundation. Supporting programs like hers, he named it the Paper Bird Project. It would fund art therapy centers, sponsor kids from underprivileged schools, and train teachers to use creativity as healing. When the paperwork was done, he stared at the name again and whispered, "You'd hate that it took me this long." The foundation launched quietly, without fanfare, but soon gained attention. Donations poured in. He refused to take credit publicly. The logo, a folded bird in mid-flight, appeared on murals and brochures around the Pacific Northwest. Months later, at an opening event in Portland, he stood in the back of the room unseen, watching children paint on wide canvases, their laughter echoing through the halls. He didn't need to speak. Just seeing their joy felt like enough. Still, part of him wondered if she was somewhere in the same city, maybe a few blocks away, maybe teaching at one of these centers. The thought was both comforting and cruel. That night, back in his apartment, he sat at the table and painted for the first time in years. The strokes were hesitant at first, but soon the image emerged. A sky filled with paper birds rising over water. He signed it, not with his name, but with a single word, "Real." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the quiet fill the room. Somewhere outside, the city lights blurred in the mist, and for the first time since she'd left, he felt something that wasn't regret. It was peace, fragile but alive. He thought of her teaching of the little girl, asking if paper birds ever find home, and smiled to himself. Maybe they do, he thought. Maybe some just take the long way back. The following spring, Portland woke to cherry blossoms drifting across the streets like soft confetti. The city was alive again, and so was Lila. She had spent the past year teaching, rebuilding her quiet world piece by piece. Her students had grown, her program had expanded, and for the first time, she allowed herself to dream beyond survival. When the community center announced a charity exhibition to raise funds for children's art therapy, she agreed to participate. Each artist was asked to contribute one painting that captured hope. Lila knew instantly what she would paint. She spent nights after class sketching under the dim light of her kitchen brushstrokes, careful and deliberate. The canvas came to life slowly, a flock of paper birds soaring over a river that shimmered like memory. At the center of the painting, she added a single bird, painted in gold, flying higher than the rest. She named it the Paper Bird. It wasn't about him, she told herself. It was about what the story had taught her, how something fragile could still fly, how forgiveness could take shape in silence. The exhibition was held in a converted warehouse, downtown, strings of warm lights hanging from the beams. People arrived in elegant coats, holding champagne glasses, murmuring over canvases and sculptures. Lila felt out of place among them, but smiled anyway. Her students had helped hang her painting near the entrance, and they stood beside it proudly, whispering to visitors about the meaning of the birds. The bidding began just after sunset. One by one, artworks found new homes. Lila's turn came near the end. The auctioneer lifted the microphone. Next we have The Paper Bird, an original oil by art therapist Lila Morgan. Bidding starts at $500. Hands rose immediately, 1,000, then 2, then 5. The crowd grew louder. Lila blinked, stunned. No painting of hers had ever sold for more than 200. The bids kept climbing. 10,000, 20. People turned to see who was driving the price up. Near the back of the room, a man in a dark suit raised his paddle again, calm, steady. 50,000, the auctioneer, said, voice trembling slightly. The crowd murmured in disbelief. 100,000, another voice countered from the opposite side. Lila felt her heart race. She couldn't see the bidders clearly. Through the lights, only the soft glint of a cufflink, the silhouette of someone tall and still. The auctioneer's voice cut through the hum. 200,000. Silence fell. No one moved. Then the man in the dark suit raised his paddle one last time. 250,000. The room erupted into applause. The hammer fell with a sharp crack. Sold, the auctioneer said to bidder number 17. Lila stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Her students clapped, thrilled by the excitement, but she could barely hear them. Who would pay that much for a painting of paper birds? After the auction ended, guests mingled over desserts and wine. Lila lingered near her students, thanking donors, posing for photos, smiling through the haze. She didn't notice him until she turned toward the gallery entrance. He stood there, tall, composed, wearing the same quiet expression she remembered from a lifetime ago. Adrian. Her breath caught. The crowd seemed to dissolve. He walked toward her slowly, the noise around them fading to a hum. In his hand he held something small, wrapped in tissue, her painting's receipt. "You," she whispered. He nodded, eyes gentle. "I couldn't resist." 250,000, she said, incredulous. "You could have just asked for a print." "I wasn't buying a painting," he said softly. "I was finding my way back." She didn't know what to say. The past year flashed through her mind, the headlines, the heartbreak, the silence, the children, the mural of paper birds. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I finally understood what you meant," he said. "Art isn't about money. It's about seeing what's real." "I stopped seeing for a while." He handed her the receipt, and she noticed something scribbled on the back in his handwriting. "It reminds me of what real looks like." The same words he had used that night in the cafe months before. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You started over," she said. "So did you." He smiled faintly. "The Paper Bird Project. It's yours if you want it." "Yours, ours," he corrected. "A foundation for kids who need what you teach." She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said. "You taught me that building something isn't the same as creating." I needed to create again. They stood there in the glow of the gallery lights, surrounded by strangers, but alone in their quiet gravity. "You changed," she whispered. "So did you," he said. "Maybe that's the point." The children ran up just then, waving small paper birds they'd folded from the event programs. "Miss Lila, he bought your painting," one shouted. Adrian crouched down, smiling at them. "You helped make it," he said. "That makes you co-artists." The kids giggled, delighted. Lila watched him, her heart twisting in a way that wasn't pain anymore. When the children ran off again, she turned back to him. "You kept the bird," she said. "Always." He reached into his pocket and showed her the same folded napkin edges, worn but still intact. "I carried it through every meeting, every failure, every quiet night." Why? Because it reminded me that even paper can survive the rain. She smiled through tears. "You're still terrible with metaphors." "Maybe," he said, "but you're still the only one who makes them make sense." The crowd applauded as another painting sold, but the noise felt distant. In that moment, Lila realized she wasn't angry anymore. The past had hurt, but it had also made them. She looked at the children, laughing by her painting at the people bidding for art, at the paper birds fluttering on their strings, and felt something like forgiveness take flight inside her. Adrian reached out his hand. She hesitated, then took it. "Dinner," he asked. "You owe me one rain-soaked apology." "Only if it's not at the Glass Harbor," she said. He laughed, the sound soft and real. "Deal." Together they walked toward the exit, past her painting, the golden bird glinting in the light above them, as if finally finding its sky. The night air outside the gallery was cool and alive, with the hum of traffic and laughter spilling from nearby restaurants. Lila and Adrian walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. He had offered her his jacket, but she refused, clutching her small purse instead, like an anchor. The city felt different now, softer somehow, as if it had been waiting for this quiet. They reached the waterfront, where streetlights reflected in long golden lines across the dark water. Adrian stopped, leaning against the railing. "I used to come here when things got too loud," he said. "Back then I thought silence meant control. And now I know it means peace." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw how much had changed. The sharp edges were gone. His eyes still carried weight, but it was gentler, grounded. "You gave up everything," she said. "Not everything," he replied. "Just the things that kept me from being someone worth finding again." "And did you?" "Not until tonight." She turned away, trying to steady her breathing. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and coffee. "You know this doesn't fix what happened," she said. "I know, but maybe it's not about fixing. Maybe it's about being honest for once." She folded her arms, struggling between caution and the part of her that still remembered his laughter, his silence, the way he had looked at her across that table months ago. "Why didn't you defend me?" she asked suddenly, voice trembling. "When that photo came out, when everyone decided what kind of person I was." He exhaled a sound that seemed to carry months of regret. "Because I was still defending the man I used to be," he said. "The one who measured truth by its cost. I was afraid of losing everything I'd built. And who are you now? Someone finally brave enough to be real." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than she expected. She closed her eyes, tears threatening. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know. You let me drown while you kept your reputation dry." "I know," he said again, stepping closer. "And I will spend the rest of my life wishing I had chosen differently that day." She opened her eyes, met his, and for a long moment they said nothing. The world around them seemed to pause. A fairy horn echoed in the distance. The rain began again, gentle at first, then steadier. He didn't move, neither did she. Finally she spoke. "Do you know what I told my students? What that forgiveness is like, painting over a mistake. You don't erase it, you make something new out of it." He smiled faintly. "Then what do we make out of this?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Maybe something real." He reached out his hand, hesitant as if asking permission from the air itself. She let him take it. The warmth felt familiar, not the kind of spark that burned, but the kind that stayed. They stood under the streetlight as rain blurred the edges of the world, and for the first time since their first night together, neither of them needed to hide. When they finally walked back toward the parking lot, Adrian glanced at her and said, "I never told you what I did with the company." "You mean Hayes Tech?" "I kept the name but turned it into something else. The Paperbird project isn't just a foundation anymore, it's an idea. We're funding creative programs in schools, supporting teachers like you." Teachers like me, she repeated softly. You're one of a kind, Lila, but the world needs more of you. She didn't know how to respond to that. Words felt too small for what she felt rising inside her. Gratitude, sadness, relief. The messy blend of endings and beginnings. When they reached her car, she turned to him. You know, for a man who once thought emotions were weaknesses, you've become quite the philosopher. He chuckled. It's cheaper than therapy. She smiled. So where do we go from here, wherever honesty takes us? That's risky, she said. Everything real is. They stood in the soft rain, the city lights painting gold on their skin. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. But fear just means it matters. She nodded, wiping her cheek. Then maybe we start again. No pretending this time, he said. No pretending, she agreed. He leaned in slowly, the space between them, dissolving the moment quiet but full. The kiss wasn't cinematic, it was gentle, deliberate. The kind that carried apology and promise in equal measure. When they pulled apart, she laughed through tears. You're soaked, she said. So are you. It's becoming our thing. I don't mind, he said. It makes everything look alive. They walked back toward the gallery where the last guests were leaving. Through the glass doors, she saw her painting still hanging, the golden bird, glowing faintly under the lights. She stopped to look at it one more time. Funny, she said softly. I painted that bird because I needed to believe it could fly. But maybe it was never about the bird. Maybe it was about you, he said. She turned to him, eyes shimmering. And maybe about you too. He smiled, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. Then let's keep flying. They stepped inside to grab her coat. The auctioneer, packing up, nodded at them. Beautiful work, he said. Someone's going to hang that in a special place. They already did, she replied quietly, glancing at Adrian. He smiled back. Outside the city continued to hum the rain, blurring the streets into mirrors. The two of them walked away side by side, their reflections shimmering in the puddles, like two paper birds taking off toward the same horizon, fragile but free. 2 years later, the morning mist rolled across Lake Union like a veil of silk. The new school stood quietly at the edge of the water, its walls painted with murals of color and light. Children's laughter echoed across the yard as gulls circled overhead. The sign near the gate read, "The Paperbird School of Art and Technology." Founded by the Paperbird Project, a place where art met innovation and where kindness was the curriculum that mattered most. Inside the main hall, sunlight spilled through tall windows, catching on hundreds of paper birds that hung from the ceiling, each one painted by a child, and strung with threads so fine they seemed to float. At a long table near the back, Adrian Hayes was kneeling beside a small boy, showing him how to build a simple robot out of recycled parts. His sleeves were rolled up his hands, streaked with marker ink. He was laughing genuinely, laughing the kind of laughter that didn't sound borrowed. The boy's robot toppled sideways, and Adrian helped him fix it, patient and proud. It doesn't have to be perfect, he said. It just has to be yours. The boy grinned and nodded. Across the room, Lila Morgan stood, watching a coffee cup in her hands. Her hair tied loosely back her apron smeared with paint. The sight of him still made her heart swell, in the quiet way love does after it has survived the storm. She walked over and handed him the cup. "You promised you'd take a break?" she said. "I'm taking a break," he replied, still kneeling. "You're teaching again. It's therapeutic. For you or for him, both." She smiled and knelt beside them, helping the boy attach wings made of cardboard to his robot. "See," she told the child, "even machines need wings." "So they can fly like the paper birds?" he asked. "Exactly." When the bell rang for lunch, the children rushed outside, their voices echoing through the courtyard. Lila and Adrian sat by the window watching them. "Can you believe this place exists?" she asked quietly. "Some days, no," he said. "Other days, I can't imagine life without it." "You know they'll talk about you again," she said. "The billionaire who gave everything away." "Let them," he said with a shrug. "They can write their stories. We'll keep living ours." She looked out at the lake. The water sparkled under the sunlight, dotted with tiny sailboats. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The old life, the power, the noise." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look around and realize I traded an empire for mornings like this. Seems like a fair deal." She nodded. "You always did have a flair for dramatic exits." He chuckled. "And you always had a way of turning pain into art." "Were even then." "Maybe we always were." They sat in companionable silence. One of the children ran past holding a kite, shaped like a bird. The string tangled in Lila's fingers, and she laughed, helping the child set it free. Adrian watched her, the way her eyes lit up, the way the sunlight turned her hair into a halo. It struck him again how love, when it's real, doesn't demand spectacle. It grows in the everyday moments, shared coffee, quiet classrooms, gentle laughter between lessons. Later that afternoon, a ceremony was held by the lake to celebrate the school's 1-year anniversary. Parents, teachers, and donors gathered under a white canopy, while the children performed a small play about a paper bird who forgot how to fly until it remembered what home felt like. When the applause faded, Lila stepped forward to speak. She looked at the audience, then at the children, then at Adrian, standing in the back with his hands in his pockets. 2 years ago, she began, I thought my story was over. I had lost my job, my name, my peace. I thought the world had written its final chapter for me. But life is generous with second chances if you let it be. This school isn't just a place to paint or code or learn. It's a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the direction of someone's life. I know because it changed mine. She paused, her voice catching slightly. So if you ever doubt that good things can come from broken places, look up. She gestured toward the ceiling. Hundreds of paper birds swayed gently in the breeze. The audience looked up, silent, moved. They're not perfect, she said. Some are lopsided, some are torn. But they're still flying. That's what matters. When the crowd applauded, Adrian's chest tightened. He felt something pure and full, a sense of gratitude so deep it hurt. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled by the lake, he found her standing under a tree, watching the children release a handful of paper birds into the wind. You were brilliant, he said. You always say that, she teased. Because it's always true. You think they'll remember us, she asked. The kids, the people who come here, maybe not us, he said, but they'll remember how it felt to be seen. She turned to face him, eyes bright. That's enough. He smiled and took her hand. Together they watched the paper birds rise over the lake, carried by wind and sunlight, drifting higher till they became small specks against the endless blue. She leaned her head on his shoulder. She went to a blind date to make someone else happy. She whispered almost like a prayer. He smiled, finishing the sentence softly. But in the end she found what real happiness looked like. The sound of children's laughter filled the air again. The paper birds danced above them, reflections shimmering across the water. The past felt distant, the future wide open. Somewhere deep in both of them, peace finally settled, steady, quiet, and beautifully real. Sometimes we walk into the wrong room just to find the person who changes everything. That's how their story began. A favor, a mistake. A night in the rain that became a lifetime. Lila thought she was doing something small, sitting in for a friend at a blind date that wasn't meant for her. Adrian thought he was waiting for another meeting, another negotiation, another empty conversation. But life has a strange way of folding fate, like paper-sharp edges, bending into something unexpected, fragile and real. When they met, neither of them knew how much they needed to be seen. She taught him that art wasn't about perfection, but about honesty. He taught her that love, when it's real, doesn't hide behind power or pride. And through storms, scandals, silence, and redemption, they found each other again, not in grand gestures, but in small truths. The brush of a hand, a quiet apology, a paper bird that refused to crumble, even in the rain. Maybe that's what love really is. Not the kind that promises forever without knowing how to keep it, but the kind that chooses to stay again and again, even when it's hard. The kind that forgives, the kind that rebuilds, the kind that looks at the cracks and calls them beautiful because they let the light through. You've watched their journey from the first drop of rain to the last ray of sunlight on Lake Union. And maybe, somewhere inside it, you saw a piece of yourself, the version of you that once believed in something simple and pure. Maybe it reminded you that love isn't gone, it's just waiting to be recognized. So if this story found you tonight, wherever you are, maybe sitting alone with your coffee, maybe driving home through the rain, maybe holding someone's hand, remember this real love still exists. It's in kindness freely given. It's in the courage to start again. It's in the quiet choice to be real when it would be easier to pretend. And if you've ever felt like the world forgot how to love gently, look closer. There are still paper birds everywhere, small, imperfect, handmade testaments to hope. They hang in classrooms, in hearts, in stories like this one, reminding us that even the simplest things can carry us home. So tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've ever folded a paper bird for someone who mattered. Tell us if you believe that one wrong turn can still lead you right where you're meant to be. Because maybe love in all its flawed and fleeting grace is worth believing in. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.